Book 1. Berossus says in the first book of his Babyloniaca that he lived during the time of Alexander, the son of Philip, and that he translated many books which had been preserved with great care at Babylon, and which dealt with a period of more than 150,000 years. These books contain the histories of heaven and of earth and sea, and the first birth and the kings and their deeds. He begins saying that the land of the Babylonians lies between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The land produces wild wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, and sesame. The roots which grow in the marshes are also eaten. These are called gongas. These roots have the same properties as barley. There are also dates, apples, and other fruits, fish and birds, both land and marsh birds. The portions of Babylonia in Arabia are waterless and barren, but those lying opposite to Arabia are mountainous and fertile. There was a great crowd of men in Babylonia, and they lived without laws, just as wild animals. In the first year, a beast named Oannes appeared from the Erythraean Sea, in a place adjacent to Babylonia. Its entire body was that of a fish, but a human head had grown beneath the head of the fish, and human feet likewise had grown from the fish's tail. It also had a human voice. A picture of it is still preserved today. He says that this beast spent the days with the men, but ate no food. It gave to the men the knowledge of letters, and sciences, and crafts of all types. It also taught men how to found cities, establish temples, introduce laws, and measure land. It also revealed to them seeds and the gathering of fruits, and in general it gave men everything which is connected with the civilized life. From the time of that beast nothing further has been discovered. But when the sun set, this beast Oannes plunged back into the sea and spent the nights in the deep, for it was amphibious. Later, other beasts also appeared. He says that he will discuss these in the Book of the Kings. Oannes wrote about birth and government, and gave the following account to men. The Revelation of Oannes. Oannes says that there was a time when everything was darkness and water, and that in this water strange beings with peculiar forms came to life. For men were born with 2 wings, and some with 4 wings and 2 faces. These had 1 body and 2 heads, and they were both masculine and feminine, and they had 2 sets of sexual organs, male and female. Other men were also born, some with the legs and horns of goats, and some with the feet of horses, and the other foreparts of men. These were hippocentaurs in form. Bulls were also born with human heads, and 4-bodied dogs with fish tails growing from their hindquarters, and dog-headed horses, and men and other beings with the heads and bodies of horses and the tails of fish, and still other creatures with the forms of all sorts of beasts. In addition to these, there were fish and creeping things, and snakes, and still further amazing variously formed creatures, differing in appearance from one another. Images of these are also set up, one after another, in the temple of Bel. A woman named Amorka ruled over all these creatures. In Chaldean, her name was Talath, which, translated into the Greek, means Thalassa. When all had been thus gathered into a chaotic mass, Bel rose up and split the woman in 2. 1 half of her he made earth, and the other sky, and he destroyed the creatures in her. But this, he says, is to talk about nature allegorically, namely that when everything consisted of moisture and creatures came into existence in it, this god took off his own head, and the other gods gathered up the blood which flowed from it and mixed the blood with earth and formed men. For this reason men are intelligent and have a share of divine wisdom. But Bel, who is to be translated into Greek as Zeus, divided the darkness in half, and separated earth and sky from each other, and ordered the universe. but the creatures died because they were unable to endure the force of the light. When Bel saw that the land was barren and fruitless, he ordered one of the gods to take his own head and mix earth with the blood flowing from it, and to form men and beasts able to endure the air. Bel also created the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and the 5 planets. The Great Year. Some suppose that in the final catastrophe the earth too will be shaken, and through clefts in the ground will uncover sources of fresh rivers which will flow forth from their full source in a larger volume. Berossus, the interpreter of Belus, affirms that the whole issue is brought about by the course of the planets. So positive is he on the point that he assigns a definite date for the conflagration and the deluge. All that the earth inherits will, he assures us, be consigned to flame when the planets, which now move in different orbits, all assemble in Cancer, so arranged in one row that a straight line may pass through their spheres. When the same gathering takes place in Capricorn, then we are in danger of the deluge. Midsummer is at present brought around by the former, midwinter by the latter. They are zodiacal signs of great power, seeing that they are the determining influences in the 2 great changes of the year. The Moon. According to the teaching of Berossus, who came from the state, or rather nation, of the Chaldees, and was the pioneer of Chaldean learning in Asia, the moon is a ball, 1/2 luminous, and the rest of a blue color. When in the course of her orbit she has surpassed below the disk of the sun, she is attracted to his rays, and great heat, and turns thither her luminous side, on account of the sympathy between light and light. Being thus summoned by the sun's disk and facing upward, her lower half, as it is not luminous, is invisible, on account of its likeness to the air. When she is perpendicular to the sun's rays, all her light is confined to her upper surface, and she is then called the new moon. And she moves on, passing by to the east. The effect of the sun upon her relaxes, and the outer edge of the luminous side sheds its light upon the earth in an exceedingly thin line. This is called the 2nd day of the moon. Day by day she is further relieved and turns, and thus are numbered the 3rd, 4th, and following days. On the 7th day, the sun being in the west, and the moon in the middle of the firmament between east and west, she is half the extent of the firmament distant from the sun, and therefore half of the luminous side is turned toward the earth. But when the sun and moon are separated by the entire extent of the firmament, and the moon is in the east with the sun over her in the west, she is completely relieved by her still greater distance from his rays, and so on the 14th day she is at the full, and her entire disk emits light. On the succeeding days up to the end of the month she wanes daily as she turns in her course, being recalled by the sun until she comes under his disk and rays, thus completing the count of the days of the month. The Walling of Babylon. They say that everything originally was water, and was called Thalassa. Bel restrained it, assigning a place to each thing, and he surrounded Babylon with a wall. But with the passage of time it disappeared, and Nabonasarus again built a wall with bronze gates which lasted until the Macedonian domination. Unplaced Fragments of Book 1. Berossus says in the first book of the Babyloniaca that a festival called Sacaea is celebrated in Babylon for a period of 5 days, beginning with the 16th day of the month Lous, and that during these days it is the custom for masters to be ruled by their slaves, and that one of the slaves puts on a robe similar to that of a king and manages the affairs of the house. This slave is called Zoganes. Sennacherib in Berossus, the embellishment of Hera. Book 2. The Book of Kings. Kings before the flood. Berossus records the following. Alorus, a Chaldean from Babylon, was the first king of the land, and he reigned for 10 saroi. They say that he spread the story about himself that the god appointed him shepherd of the people. Berossus wrote in terms of saroi and neroi and sosoi. The Saros indicates a period of 3,600 years, the Neros 600 years, and the Sosos 36 years. After the death of Alorus, his son Alaparus reigned 3 saroi, and after Alaparus, Amalon, one of the Chaldeans from the city Pautipiblon. He reigned 13 saroi. Then Amnon, the Chaldean from the city Pautipiblon, he reigned 12 saroi. In his time, he says, Anadotus, a beast with the form of man and fish, appeared from the Erythraean Sea. Then Amygalaris from the city Pautipiblon, and he reigned for 18 saroi. And after him, Oannes, a shepherd from the city Pautipiblon, reigned for 10 saroi. And again, at this time, he says, 4 beasts with the same shape and mixture of fish and man as those before appeared from the Erythraean Sea. Their names were the following: Eliodocus, Enogamus, Enobolus, and Amentos. Then Eldora, from the city Pautipiblon, became king, and reigned for 18 saroi. In his time, he says, another creature similar in its mixture of fish and man, named Odicon, appeared from the Erythraean Sea. He says that these creatures altogether explain in detail the things which had been spoken summarily by Oannes. Then Amepsinos, a Chaldean from Lauragcus, became king, and he reigned for 10 saroi. Then Otiartes, a Chaldean from Lauragcus, became king. He reigned for 8 saroi. After the death of Otiartes, his son Xithothros reigned for 18 saroi. Altogether there were 10 kings and 120 saroi. In his time, he says, the great flood occurred, and the story has been recorded as follows. Cronus appeared to Xithothros in a dream, and revealed that on the 15th day of the month Daisios, mankind would be destroyed by a flood. Therefore he ordered Xithothros to bury the beginnings and the middles and the ends of all writings in Sippar, the city of the sun. Then he should build a boat and embark on it with his kin and his close friends. Food and drink should be placed in it. He was to load into it also the winged and 4-footed creatures, and to make everything ready to sail. If asked where he was sailing, he should reply, "To the gods to pray for good things for men." Heeding him, he built a boat 5 stades in length, and 2 stades in breadth. He collected everything he had been ordered, and he embarked his wife and his children and his closest friends, and straightway the things from the god came upon him. On the 3rd day, after the flood had come and swiftly receded, Xithothros released some of the birds to determine if they might see somewhere land which had arisen from the waters. But finding neither food nor a place of which to alight, the birds returned to the ship. After a few days, Xithothros again released the birds, and these again returned to the ship, but with their feet covered with mud. On being released a 3rd time, they did not again return to the ship. Xithothros understood that land had appeared. Tearing apart a portion of the seams and seeing that the boat had landed on a mountain, he disembarked with his wife and his daughter and the pilot. After performing obeisance to the earth and setting up an altar and sacrificing to the gods, he and those who had disembarked from the ship with him disappeared. When Xithothros and the others did not come back in, those remaining in the boat disembarked and searched for him, calling out his name. Xithothros was no longer visible to them, but a voice from the sky ordered them to be reverent. Because of his piety, he had gone to live with the gods, and his wife and the pilot were to share the same honor. The voice also told them that they were to return to Babylon, and that it was decreed that they were to dig up the writings from the city of the Sacaeans and distribute them to mankind. It also said that the land in which they found themselves was Armenia. After hearing these things, they sacrificed to the gods and proceeded to Babylon on foot. A portion of the ship which came to rest in Armenia still remains in the mountains of the Corduaeans of Armenia, and some of the people, scraping off pieces of bitumen from the ship, bring them back and use them as talismans. When these people came to Babylon, they dug up the writings at the city of the Sacaeans, and founded many cities, and rebuilt shrines, and founded anew Babylon. In the 10th generation after the flood, there was a man among the Chaldeans who was just, great, and knowledgeable about heavenly phenomena. After the flood, Euxios ruled over the land of the Chaldeans for Neroi, and after him his son Comasbelos took over the kingship, 4 Neroi and 5 Sosoi. Polyhistor counts in all 86 kings from Xisuthros and from the flood until the Medes took Babylon. He mentions each of them by name on the authority of the book of Berossus. He sums up the whole period as containing 33,091 years. And after these, following their so powerful dynasty, the Medes, after they had gathered together an army against Babylon, took the city and installed in that very place tyrants from their own ranks. Hereupon he also records the names of the tyrants of the Medes. 8 in number, and their years 224, and again 11 kings in 28 years. Then the Chaldean dynasty, 49 kings and 458 years. Next, the Arabian dynasty, 9 kings and 245 years. After these years he also reports the rule of Semiramis over Assyria. Then again he lists one after another the names of 45 kings and sets the total of their years at 526. Nabonasarus collected together and destroyed the records of the kings before him, in order that the list of the Chaldean kings might begin with him. In the second book, he described the kings one after another until he says, Nabonasarus was king. Book 3. After these, he says, there was a king of the Chaldeans whose name is Phulus. And after him, so Polyhistor reports, Sennacherib became king. After the reign of the brother of Sennacherib, and after the rule of Achises over the Babylonians, he was killed by Merodach-Baldon before he ruled even 30 days. And Merodach-Baldon maintained himself as tyrant for 6 months, and a man whose name was Belibos killed him, and he became king. And in the 3rd year of Belibos, Sennacheribus, king of the Assyrians, gathered together an army against the Babylonians, faced them resolutely, and defeated them. After taking Belibos and his friends prisoner, he transported them into the land of the Assyrians. He ruled over the Babylonians and established his son, Assurdanius, as king over them. He himself returned to the land of the Assyrians. When he learned that the Greeks had invaded the land of the Cilicians, he hastened against them, faced them, and, after many of his own troops had been cut down by his enemies, gained a victory in the battle. As a memorial of his victory, he left a statue of himself on the battlefield and ordered that an account of his courage and heroic deed be inscribed in Chaldean script for future times. And Sennacherib built so he reports, the city Tarson, after the model of Babylon, and he gave it the name Tarsan. Finally, at that time there was Sennacherib, the 25th, of the rulers who compelled Babylon to submit to his domination. On the coast of Cilicia he defeated a group of Ionian warships and drove them into flight. He also built the temple of Sandes, who is Heracles, erected bronze pillars, and caused, he said, his great deeds to be inscribed truthfully. He also built Tarson, according to the plan and model of Babylon, so that the river Kidnus flows through just as Euphrates flows through Babylon. And after all the other acts of Sennacherib, he adds the following note. He lived 18 years, and he died at the same time that a trap was being readied for him by his son Ardumuzon. Sennacherib, 18 plus years, and after him his son 8 years, and thereafter Samuges, 21 years, and his brother 21 years, and thereafter Nabopalsar, 20 years, and after him Nabuchodonosarus, 43 years. And in all there are 88 years included in the period from Sennacherib until Nabuchodonosarus. And after all this, Polyhistor again narrates some works and deeds of Sennacherib, and he refers to his sons, and narrates everything in detail. Following him, and after him, Nergalus reigned. He was assassinated by his son Adremalus, but Axerdes, his brother by the same father, but not by the same mother, killed him. And pursuing, he hurled his army against the city of the Byzantines, which had previously gathered mercenaries for the purpose of helping him. Further, Axerdes gained possession through conquest of Egypt and the region of Col Syria. And after Samuges, Sardanapalus succeeded to the rule over the Chaldeans for 21 years. He, Nabonasarus, sent troops to the assistance of Astyages, the tribal chieftain and satrap of the Medes, in order to obtain a daughter of Astyages, Amytis, as a wife for his son Nabuchodonosarus. He had been appointed general by Sarachus, the king of the Chaldeans, when Sarachus marched against Nineveh. Sarachus, dismayed at his attack, burned himself together with his palace. Nabopolassarus, the father of Nabuchodonosor, took over the rule of the Chaldeans in Babylon, and thereafter Nabuchodonosor ruled for 43 years, and gathering an army he marched out and took prisoner the Jews, the Phoenicians, and the Syrians. After this ruler, Samoges, there was also Sardanapalus. After him Sarachus ruled over the Assyrians, when he learned that a warrior people which had been formed from different bands was coming up from the sea to attack him. He quickly sent Bopolassarus to Babylon as general, but Bopolassarus, after deciding to rebel, arranged a marriage between Amuhaddin, the daughter of Astyages, the chief of the Medes, and his son Nabuchodonosor, and swiftly setting out he moved to attack Ninos. Knowledge of all this reached King Sarachus. He had his capital burned, but Nabuchodonosor surrounded Babylon with a strong wall after he took over the rule of the kingdom. Nabopolassarus, his father, heard that the satrap, who had been posted to Egypt, Col Syria, and Phoenicia, had become a rebel. No longer himself equal to the task, he entrusted a portion of his army to his son Nabuchodonosor, who was still in the prime of life, and sent him against a rebel. Nabuchodonosor drew up his force in battle order and engaged the rebel. He defeated him and subjected the country to the rule of the Babylonians again. At this very time, Nabopolassarus, his father, fell ill and died in the city of the Babylonians after having been king for 21 years. Nabuchodonosor learned of his father's death shortly thereafter. After he arranged affairs in Egypt and the remaining territory, he ordered some of his friends to bring the Jewish, Phoenician, Syrian, and Egyptian prisoners, together with the bulk of the army and the rest of the booty, to Babylonia. He himself set out with a few companions and reached Babylon by crossing the desert. On finding that affairs were being managed by the Chaldeans and the kingship being maintained by the noblest one of these, he took charge of the whole of his father's realm. When the prisoners arrived, he ordered that dwelling places be assigned to them, in the most suitable parts of Babylonia. He generously adorned the temple of Bel and other temples from the war booty. He strengthened the old city and added a new outer city. He arranged it so that besiegers would no longer be able to divert the river against the city by surrounding the inner city with 3 circuits of walls, and the outer city with 3 also. The walls of the inner city were made of baked brick and bitumen, and those of the outer city of brick alone. And he had walled the city in notable fashion, and adorned its gates in a manner befitting a holy place. He built another palace next to the palace of his father. It would perhaps be tedious to describe the height and the rest of the riches of this palace. Despite its extraordinary size and splendor, however, it was completed in 15 days. In this palace he built and arranged a so-called hanging garden, by setting up high stone terraces which he made appear very similar to mountains planted with all kinds of trees. He did this because his wife, who had been raised in Media, longed for mountainous surroundings. After Nabuchodonosor succeeded to the throne, he surrounded Babylon with a triple circuit of walls in 15 days, and he changed the course of the Amocles River, a branch of the Euphrates, and the Akrakonon, and further, after excavating a reservoir 40 parasangs in circumference and 20 fathoms in depth above the city of the Saparians, he set up sluices, which on being opened irrigated the plain. They called these sluices ekadonomonas, just as if they have the will or the ability to comply on their own. He also built dikes against the overflow of the Erythraean Sea, and he founded the city of Teredon as a defense against the attacks of the Arabs, and he adorned his palace with trees, naming it the Hanging Garden. He gives this account of the aforementioned king and many things in addition in the 3rd book of the Chaldaica, in which he censures the Greek historians for wrongly thinking that Babylon was founded by Semiramis, the Assyrian, and falsely writing that its wonders were created by her. Nabuchodonosor fell ill after he had begun the aforementioned walls, and died. He had been king for 43 years. His son, Evela-Merodachus, became master of the kingdom. Because he managed affairs in a lawless and outrageous fashion, he was plotted against and killed by Nabonasarus, his sister's husband. He was king for 2 years. After Evela-Merodachus had been killed, Nabonasarus, the man who had plotted against him, succeeded to the throne and was king for 4 years. Laborosawardkodus, the son of Nabonasarus, who was an only child, was master of the kingdom for 9 months. Because his wickedness became apparent in many ways, he was plotted against and brutally killed by his friends. After he had been killed, the plotters met and jointly conferred the kingdom on Nabonidus, a Babylonian and a member of the conspiracy. During his reign, the river walls of the city of Babylon were constructed from baked brick and bitumen. In the 17th year of his reign, Cyrus, after he had come out of Persia with a great army and subdued all the rest of the kingdom, advanced against Babylonia. On learning of the invasion, Nabonidus met him with an army and opposed him in battle. After being defeated, he fled with a small retinue and took refuge within the city of Borsipians. Cyrus, meanwhile, seized Babylon and ordered that the outer walls of the city be thrown down, because the city seemed to him to be very formidable and hard to capture. Cyrus then marched on Borsippa and laid siege to Nabonidus. Nabonidus, however, did not await the siege, but surrendered himself first. Dealing with him in a gracious manner, Cyrus granted him Carmania as his residence and sent him out of Babylonia. King Darius, however, took away a part of his province for himself. Nabonidus, therefore, died after spending the remainder of his life in this country. And Cyrus ruled over Babylon 9 years. Then he was killed when he entered into another battle in the plain of the Dos. After him, Cambyses ruled 8 years, and then Darius 36 years. After him, Xerxes, and further the remaining Persian kings. The Persians, the Medes, and the Magi did not believe in wooden or stone images of the gods, but in fire and water like the philosophers. Later, however, after many years, they began to worship statues in human form, as Berossus reports in the 3rd book of his Chaldean history. Artaxerxes, the son of Darius, the son of Ochus, introduced this practice. He was the first to set up an image of Aphrodite Anaitis in Babylon and to require such worship from the Susians, Ecbatanians, Persians, and Bactrians, and from Damascus and Sardis. Possible Fragments of Berossus from Book 2. Noah lived 350 years after the deluge in happiness. He died after having lived 950 years. Let no one, as a result of comparing life now and the fewness of the years which we live with that of the ancients, think that what is said about them is false, judging that they did not live to such an age because no one now does. For they were dear to God and his own creatures, also as their food was more favorable to longer life. It is reasonable that they lived so great a number of years. Then also God permitted them to live longer, because of the excellence of their character, and the usefulness of their discoveries. Astronomy and geometry, since, unless they lived 600 years, for so long is the period of a great year, they could not make accurate predictions. All those among the Greeks and barbarians who have written archaeologies support my account. For Manetho, the historian of Egypt, Berossus, the compiler of the Chaldaica, and the Phoenician historians Mochus and Hestiaeus, together with Hieronymus the Egyptian, agree with what I have said. In addition, Hesiod, Hecataeus, Hellanicus, Acusilaus, together with Ephorus and Nicolaus, record that the ancients lived 1,000 years. When Sennacherib was king of the Babylonians, the Chaldeans said that his daughter's son would take away the kingdom from his grandfather. This frightened him, and, to joke a bit, he became an Acrisius to his daughter, for he guarded her very closely. The girl, however, became pregnant by some obscure man, and gave birth in secret, for necessity was wiser than the Babylonian. The guards, fearing the king, hurled the child from the citadel, for the girl was confined there, but an eagle, observing the fall of the child with its sharp eyes, swooped down and threw its back under it before it was dashed against the ground. The eagle brought the infant to a garden and placed it down very carefully. The keeper of the place, on seeing the beautiful child, fell in love with it and raised it. It was called Gilgamos, and became king of the Babylonians. Doubtful Fragment. Of the barbarians, the Babylonians seem, on the one hand, to pass by in silence, the one first principle of all things, and on the other hand, to make two first principles, Tauthe and Apasson, making Apasson the husband of Tauthe, and calling her the mother of the gods. They gave birth to a single son, Momus. These same parents produced another generation, Dachi and Dachos. Then again, these same parents produced a third generation, Kesari and Asuros, who gave birth to 3, Ano, Ilanos, and Aus. Aus and Dauche gave birth to a son, Belos, who they say was the creator.